It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Welcome to the Happy Families Podcast. Every Tuesday on the pod, I answer your questions about making your family happier. If you would like to submit a question, please go to happyfamilies.com.au, click on the link for the podcast page, and then push the record button. It's easy to use. Make sure you know what you're going to say, and you could end up on the podcast. That's happyfamilies.com.au, and click on the podcast page if you would like to submit a question like this one.
Hi, Justin and Kylie. I love the podcast and really appreciate all your advice. And I'm hoping you can give me some advice on my current worry. I have 2 kids of my own, a 3-year-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. I also have 2 sisters who are my best friends, and I want my kids to grow up to be best friends as well, but I don't know how to facilitate it. Currently, the 1-year-old loves the 3-year-old and longs to play and engage, but the 3-year-old is not a fan of his little sister, especially when she goes anywhere near him. I know it will be a long journey, but it sounds like your girls are best friends. What can I do to help build a good relationship between them from the get-go?
So I love this question, and I don't know if I love or am a little bit embarrassed by the fact that you think that my kids are best friends. You know what? Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're really great. But sometimes they are not best friends at all. And I think this is the thing with sibling relationships. Okay, I love the question. Such a challenge. I mean, the best way to not have sibling conflict is to not have siblings. You've got 2 kids already. It's too late for that. The other thing that I always say is, I mean, we don't want the kids to fight, but let's be honest. If you're lucky enough to be in a partnered or married relationship, this is a person that you swore you would cherish and love for your entire life. And sometimes you can't stand the sight of them. Well, hopefully it's not that bad, but you know what I mean? Sometimes you really do get on each other's nerves and you need some space. So if we can just be real about the fact that relationships rupture and repair, and if we can keep in mind that our central goal for our kids is to teach them to repair well, to really get that right and to minimize the ruptures in their relationship, I think that's a really great standard to work towards. And it's also fairly realistic because relationships are tricky. Regardless of that, let's talk about this. Okay, from a statistical and research point of view, the majority of kids around the world have at least one sibling. And this is a particularly unique relationship. It's the one that is likely to last longer than any other relationship that we have in our lives. It's longer than the relationship that we have with our parents. They pass on when we're now, 50s, 60s, 70s. It's longer than the relationship that we have with our kids for the same reason. We pass on when there's a 20 or 30 year gap between us, whatever it might be. But our siblings, we've kind of got them from the time we or they are born right through to the very, very end of our lives, longest lasting relationship of our lives, and obviously, therefore, have the potential to play an integral part in our families. Yet, and this is what's curious to me, it's a tricky thing to study compared to the abundance of studies that we have on parent-child relationships and peer relationships. There's a fairly small amount of research devoted to the role of siblings and how we develop. So here's what we know. In early childhood, there are 4 main characteristics of sibling relationships that are, let's use the word prominent. First, sibling relationships are emotionally charged, and they're defined by really strong, uninhibited emotions of both positive and negative, and sometimes ambivalent quality. Now, a lot of this comes down to neurological development. The more neurological development you've got, the better you can regulate your emotions and your behaviors, and therefore, the less likely it is that you're going to have emotionally charged relationships. When you're little, growing up with somebody, of course, there's going to be explosiveness, and there's also going to be extreme delight. Second thing, sibling relationships are often characterized by intimacy, a beautiful, delightful, innocent, precious intimacy, because kids get to spend a lot of time together. They get to know one another really well. And this is a beautiful, intimate knowledge that translates into all kinds of opportunities for providing emotional and instrumental support for one another, and also for just that time and that intimacy. It means lots of time for pretend play and lots of time for conflict and lots of time for learning how to understand another person's point of view or their thoughts or their feelings, lots of time to just have fun. The third major characteristic of sibling relationships during childhood is that they are characterized by large individual differences in the quality of relationships that kids have with one another. Fourth and finally, the age difference between siblings is a source of fascination for me. Got issues of power, issues of control, issues of rivalry and jealousy, all sorts of contention that kids can get involved in together, but also lots of positive complementary exchanges like teaching or helping or caregiving and pro-social behavior. The age of one child to another has a big bearing on this. And it seems that bigger gaps lead to more pro-social behavior and smaller gaps can often lead to more conflict. There's more competition for resources. There's less neurological development. It's harder for them to communicate well, all that kind of thing. But I'd say broadly speaking, the characteristics of sibling relationships mean that we as parents have a lot to worry about because it can be so emotional and it can be so highly charged. Okay, so with that said, let's just bear this in mind. Most children, based on the research that I've discovered, are positive and really eager to help their siblings, especially when they're the older sibling caring for a younger sibling. By early childhood, the data that I've found indicates that siblings have more positive and friendly interactions, which outweighs any negative interactions, but they are still going to occur. What we've got with siblings is wonderful opportunities for moral and emotional and social and cognitive development and the opportunity to inject themselves into the worlds of somebody else's social and emotional and moral and cognitive development world. Like it's so good for them. So where do we go with this if we want our kids to really like each other? Let's talk about this particularly important area of research. There's not much there, but from what I have found, there is some evidence that there are better and worse ways for parents to intervene when kids disagree. Because sibling conflicts are reasonably frequent, because they're usually poorly resolved, and because they can sometimes be highly aggressive, parents will often be really emotional. They'll employ harsh and punitive discipline. And this, according to research, is associated with more conflict between siblings and less friendly interactions, even before the younger child in the pair is even 1 year of age. So essentially, when we jump in and we're coercive, when we're aggressive, when we're punitive, it teaches the kids exactly that. And coercive and frequent sibling conflict, or even bullying in the family in childhood, understandably and unsurprisingly, is associated with poorer adjustment, both as kids and also later in life. We know that this is going to be a really big problem, particularly when sibling warmth is absent. And so we just want to help our kids to love each other. So based on these findings, here's what I'd be recommending. Parents, if you can step in a loving and kind way, if you can mediate gently where you have to, and then structure the negotiation process so the kids are resolving things primarily with their own solutions, but with your gentle guidance, they're going to do better. In other words, explore, explain, empower. Try not to intervene unless you have to. If you do have to intervene with explicit teaching where you need to, but to the extent that you can, stay out of the way or highlight that there's a problem and help them, guide them to solve themselves in pro-social ways. Lastly, I'd say this, be a model. Just be a model. Be a genuinely good person. Kids will learn those characteristics from you, love and patience and kindness and generosity. Good luck. There's no way that you're going to stamp out the sibling rivalry. It will exist no matter what, especially with a 3-year-old and 1-year-old. But these skills can be learned. Kids can learn to be pro-social. And I think that our second question about emotion regulation will probably be helpful here as well. Let's take a look at question number 2.
Hi, Justin. My name's Rachel and I'm from Perth, WA. I just wanted some advice regarding my 11-year-old son. Lately, he's just been crying a lot and unable to control his feelings. Mainly happens at school. If the teacher asks him a question and he's not sure of the answer, he'll just burst into tears. At sport events, if things don't go as well as he'd hoped, he'll just start crying. A few weeks ago, he was involved in an engineering competition with 3 other boys from school, and things didn't go as planned. And towards the end, he just became overwhelmed and just started crying uncontrollably. We always tell our children that it's okay to feel angry or scared or upset and to voice those feelings. But now that he is 11 and getting older, I'm just worried that in school situations, he might start to get bullied or teased because he's crying so much. And I just wanted some advice that we could give him to try and control his feelings at school so he's not crying every day. Thanks.
Okay, Rachel from Perth. I think this is more of a you thing than a him thing. He will figure this out for himself and make it work. Generally, is probably the way that I'd be approaching this. Stay out of the way and let him work it out. Emotions are an essential part of human functioning. We're trying to help our emotions to be adaptive. They are just passing on information to us. They give us information about us, about the environment, about the people who are entering our orbit, and they predispose us to act accordingly. Our research on emotional variables and specifically emotional regulation is one of the fastest growing areas of psychological research and has been for the last 20 years or so. This really is a booming area of research. Your 11-year-old son is struggling to regulate his emotions. So let's get clear on what emotional regulation is. A researcher by the name of Thompson defines emotional regulation this way, and I'm quoting here: the external and internal processes responsible for monitoring, evaluating, and modifying our emotional reactions to meet our goals. So let's put this in the context of your 11-year-old son. He's got a goal. He wants to appear competent. He wants to do well, whether it's an activity or whether it's a sport he's involved in or it's an exam or whatever it might be. He's got this goal he's trying to meet. Something happens and it's external to him, or perhaps it's going on inside him, and he's monitoring it, he's evaluating it, and then he's modifying his behavior accordingly because he believes that doing what he's doing is going to move him in the direction of his goals. Now, as he gets older and more neurologically mature, he's going to realize that some of these things are more adaptive and some of them are less adaptive. But basically, this whole idea of emotion regulation is, can I express or contain my emotions appropriately for the situation so that I can achieve my goals in a socially appropriate way? Now, at the moment, you're feeling that it's not socially appropriate, and as an 11-year-old, it's probably not consistent with the norm. So here's what I want to highlight in terms of what norms are. If we look at age and emotional regulation, studies seem to show that during childhood and adolescence, the acquisition of those skills to modulate those emotional responses is really closely related to the neurobiological maturation that our children are going through. So we see it begin to really develop and take off from about the age of 3. And by 9-ish, most researchers would agree that the majority of kids are doing okay with their emotional regulation most of the time. That is, they're expressing or containing emotions in a socially appropriate way in the pursuit of their goals. But there are big differences between girls and boys. Essentially, expression of emotions in boys, much more likely to be externalizing. Girls, much more likely to internalize those emotions. There was a 2013 meta-analysis by a couple of researchers, Chaplin and Aldeo, who found that there were significant, enduring, small differences in gender roles in the expression of emotions. So girls tend to express more positive emotions and more negative internalizing emotions like sadness and anxiety. Boys, they express more externalizing emotions like anger, and that's what we're seeing with your son. So let's have a look at some maladaptive strategies for dealing with big emotions. We've got giving up, that is, I don't want to do anything anymore. We've got withdrawal, I'm just going to hide out in my bedroom, I don't want to see anyone. There's rumination, where they just keep on thinking about it, can't get it out of their head. Self-devaluation, it's my fault, I'm an idiot, I'm a loser. And aggressive actions, I'm going to fight you, I'm going to blow up about this, I've had enough. So those are all maladaptive strategies, and that's what I'm hearing from your son. What I'm wanting you to do is have some conversations with him about adaptive strategies. Let me give you 6 or 7 adaptive strategies, just one-liners for each. So the first one is, if we can move away from the emotion-focused coping and move into what's called problem-focused coping, we start to make progress. So a problem-solving approach would be something like, if I'm angry, I'm going to try and change what it is that's making me angry. I'm going to do something differently, or I'm going to move my environment or do something so that I can adapt effectively to the thing that's driving me nuts. There's distraction. So I'm feeling like this. I'm going to go and do something fun. Ideally, we need to be careful with boys. They tend to seek out risk or sensation when they want distraction. We want something that's healthy and safe if they're going to do something fun. Another adaptive strategy is forgetting, or I guess acceptance with an acknowledgement that it's going to pass, or accepting that this thing is making me angry. So both forgetting and acceptance can be helpful. Humor enhancement, think about things that make you happy. Cognitive problem solving, think about what you can do. And revaluation, telling yourself that it's not really that important, getting some perspective around it. Those are adaptive coping strategies. You might want to sort of press rewind, grab a pen and paper and jot them down. I'll actually have my team put this into the show notes for you because I think that you'll find that really, really helpful. Fundamentally, what I want you to do is have a conversation with your son about the different strategies and ask him which ones feel good to try. And then your job is just to be a gentle support wherever you can. Now, because this is mainly happening at school, it's a bit tricky. You probably want to role play things a little bit, work things through with him and let him have a go. But the one thing that I'm reminded of as I listen to this particular scenario is something that Lisa D'Amour said to me when we were recording a podcast maybe about a year ago now. Lisa D'Amour is one of America's most loved and trusted child and adolescent psychologists. And she said this, she said, emotions belong on your cognitive board of directors, but they don't chair the board. What I think she's really getting at here is that if you've got a range of inputs that are magnifying or amplifying emotions, you need to pay attention to that. However, you've got to be able to switch that emotion center of the brain down so that the planning strategy center of your brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, can take over and make the decisions. That's what should be chairing the board. And when you've got an 11-year-old boy, lack of neurological maturation, lack of inhibition, lack of regulation means that there might have been a hostile takeover here. It's time to restore some order. So please remember, sometimes kids are going to regulate their emotions by expressing them. We don't need to manage every emotion. We don't need to stamp every emotion out. We don't need to help them to control their emotions all the time. But we also don't need to elevate their emotions and make them king. Sometimes it's just fine to let the kids have their emotion. It's like that train going into a tunnel. Some tunnels are long and dark and deep, but guess what? The train always comes out the other end. It will calm down. Other than that, what I'm going to suggest is that you help him to practice some basic skills that can improve what we'd call his vagal tone. Vagal theory or polyvagal theory essentially says that if you can have a really nice high vagal tone, that you're going to be well regulated. The way you do that is with nature and with cold water and with deep breathing and with support seeking. Through doing those things, your son will develop frustration tolerance and he'll get better. He'll become more patient. But I think really this is about time. This is about you being patient, helping him to develop some skills. He's only 11. He'll get better at it as time goes on, especially with you being a great model. Good luck. That's all we've got time for today. If you would like to submit a question, I'll do my best to answer it. Just jump on to happyfamilies.com.au. That's happyfamilies.com.au. Click on the podcasts link and then push the record button. It's that simple, easy to use. If you'd like more information, you can visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.